y'all, welcome back and thanks for stopping by. In today's video, I'm going to show y'all how I made 5 cute Halloween decor pieces. Let's get started. For the first DIY, I used 2 of the wooden standing ghost and 3 of the wooden ghost ornaments that I picked up at Family Dollar. I started by removing the ghost from the bases. This was easy to do by applying a little bit of pressure while twisting. Once the bases were removed, I sanded the bottom of the ghost so that they would be smooth. Next, I took some lightweight spackling from Dollar Tree and filled in the holes on the top of the ornaments. After letting the spackling dry, I sanded it down so that it would be smooth. Then I painted all the ghosts with ivory chalk paint. Once that was dry, I used some dark vintage antiquing wax from Krylon to make the ghosts look old and weathered. I used a foam brush to apply the wax and a wet baby wipe to wipe it right back off. I repeated these steps until I was happy with how the ghosts looked. I then used a sanding block and sanded the ghosts to blend the wax and give them a more distressed look. I wanted an even more distressed look, so I took a utility knife and made indentions around the edges of the ghost, and I also went back in and sanded a little more heavy-handed in certain areas. If you choose to do this with the utility knife, please be careful and don't cut yourself. Once I was happy with the distressing on all 5 ghosts, I took some apple barrel paint in the color Burnt Umber and painted around the edges of all the ghosts and made sure to paint inside the indentations I made with the utility knife and sanding block. I also painted the insides of their eyes and mouth. For the base of this project, I used one of the wavy wood plaques from Dollar Tree. I attached one of the large ghosts to the wood plaque by using hot glue and 2 tumbling tower blocks. I then attached the other large ghost so that it would look like it was floating, and the 3 smaller ghosts where I thought they looked best. I chose to use 5 ghosts for this project to represent my family. The 2 large ghosts represents my husband and I, and the 3 smaller ghosts represent our son and 2 dogs, Cass and Little. You could easily customize this project just by adding or subtracting the number of ghosts you choose to use. I used some Spanish moss from Dollar Tree and hot glue to cover the wood plaque and tumbling tower blocks. To finish off this project, I took 4 pumpkins off of some of the pumpkin filler picks from Dollar Tree and used a stick I picked up outside to create a stem for each of the pumpkins. I then used hot glue to stack 3 of the pumpkins in front of the ghost and placed 1 pumpkin behind them. I'm very happy with how this project turned out. It was quick and simple to make. Today's video is part of the Farmhouse Halloween Challenge hosted by myself, 6 Kids in a Glue Gun, Crafty Cove, and the Rusted Willow, with our special guest host this month, Dee Dee's Art Workshop. So after you finish watching my video, head down to the description box and check out the playlist. You're sure to get some wonderful Halloween decor inspiration. Moving on to DIY number 2, I started with 5 wooden bat cutouts that I picked up on Amazon and used some lightweight spackling from Dollar Tree to fill in the holes at the top of each bat. After that was dry and sanded smooth, I painted the bats with 2 coats of apple barrel paint in the color Pavement. Once that was dry, I dry brushed over the bats using a small paintbrush and apple barrel paint in the color Dolphin Gray. For the base, I used one of the Happy Halloween signs from Dollar Tree. First, I peeled off the layer of paper with the plastic coating. This plastic coating makes it almost impossible to paint. With the top layer of paper peeled off, I used a damp rag and rubbed off the remaining paper, being very careful not to get the sign too wet. Once I had all the paper removed, I flipped the sign over and ran a bead of hot glue along all the seams to reinforce them. Next, I gave the sign 2 coats of apple barrel paint in the color Elephant Gray. Once that was dry, I took apple barrel paints in the colors Country Gray and Dolphin Gray and Folk Art brushed metal paint in brushed silver, and using small coarse paint brushes, I alternated the colors using a semi-dry brushing method. It did end up taking several layers of both the Country Gray and Dolphin Gray to give the base the color I was going for. I used the brushed silver to add a few highlights throughout the base once it was finished. I then repeated this step on all sides of the base until I was happy with the way it looked. To give the base a little bit of a distressed look, I took apple barrel paint in the color Pavement and dry brushed it around the edges of the entire base. Next, I took some wooden letters from Walmart and picked out the letters to spell the word beware and painted them with Folk Art brushed metal in the color brushed silver. While the paint was drying, I took some old wire I had laying around the house and a pencil and made 5 springs by wrapping the wire around the pencil. I made sure to leave a straight piece of wire at the top and bottom of each spring. I made 2 shorter springs and 3 longer springs so that the bats would look like they were flying. After I had all 5 springs made, I put them into the base by putting a little pressure on the wire as I was twisting it like I was using a screwdriver into the top of the base. This turned out to be a lot easier than I thought it was going to be to put it through the pressed paper. Once the wire was through the base, I bent the wire underneath the base and secured it with a generous amount of hot glue. I repeated this step on all 5 of the springs, then went back in and reinforced the wire under the base with more hot glue. I put the 3 longer springs along the back of the base, trying to space them out as evenly as possible, and then the 2 shorter springs out in front between the longer springs. Next, I used hot glue to attach a bat to each of the springs. I would recommend using a stronger adhesive for a longer lasting hold. I just used hot glue for video purposes. Then I attached the word beware, trying to space the letters out as evenly as possible to the front of the base using hot glue. Again, you could use a stronger adhesive here if you wanted to. To finish off this project, I used some Spanish moss from Dollar Tree to cover the top of the base. Moving on to DIY number 3. For this project, I started with one of the oval wood plaques from Dollar Tree and a piece of scrapbook paper out of the Spellbound Forest book I picked up on sale at Michael's. I started by tracing the wood oval onto the back of the scrapbook paper and cut it out using a pair of scissors. To glue this piece of scrapbook paper onto the wood oval, I used some Mod Podge and a foam brush. I applied a generous layer of Mod Podge to the front of the oval and used the foam brush to spread it out as evenly as possible. Then I placed the scrapbook paper on top of the oval and used a Mod Podge roller to make sure I got all the air bubbles out from underneath the paper. You don't have to have a roller to do this. You can use your fingers or anything else you may have on hand. Once the paper was smooth, I added a very generous layer of Mod Podge to the top of the paper to seal it. I did my best not to leave any large clumps of Mod Podge on the paper. After the Mod Podge was dry, I took a sanding block and went around the edges to clean them up a little. Then I took some apple barrel paint in the color black and painted the edges of the oval. I tried not to get any black paint on the front of the oval. Next, I took 3 of the tumbling tower pieces from Dollar Tree and used hot glue to glue them on top of each other to make a stack. Then I used a scrap piece of the scrapbook paper and hot glue to cover all but the back side of the block stack. I picked up a skeleton bat from Target. Dollar Tree does carry similar bats, but both of my stores were sold out. Since this bat is meant to hang, its feet are turned around backwards. I needed them to face forward, so I used a pair of scissors and removed both legs right under the knee. I needed to reshape the wings on the bat, so I used my heating tool on the high setting to soften up the plastic at the bat's joints so that I could easily bend them inwards, almost like the bat was giving a hug. It didn't take much heat at all, just enough for the plastic to get a sheen on it. It looked like it was sweating. You could use a hairdryer on high to soften the plastic to make it moldable if you wanted to and didn't have a heating tool. Please be careful when doing this and don't burn yourself. You may choose to wear gloves if you want a little protection just in case. As you can see, I bent both wings inward at the elbow joints and at the wrist joints just enough so that the tips of the wings are easy to push together. It didn't take longer than a couple of minutes to mold the desired wing shape. Once I had the wings shaped, I used a generous amount of hot glue to glue the wing tips together. Once the glue was set up, I did go back in and reinforce the back of the wing tips with more hot glue. If you're worried about how well the hot glue will hold up, you could certainly use some E6000 and clamps to glue the wing tips together. Next, I used a generous amount of hot glue to attach the bat in the center of the oval. I'm using hot glue for video purposes, but I definitely recommend using a stronger adhesive like E6000. With the bat in place, I reattached his little legs, feet facing forward this time. To do this, I just used hot glue, but again, you can use a stronger adhesive if you like. Next, I used some hot glue to attach the stack of tumbling tower blocks right under the bat between its legs. This is going to help the LED candle set straight and not tilt downward. To finish off this project, I used some jute cord from Walmart and some hot glue to create a hanger on the back of the plaque. I did make sure to go back in after the glue had set up and add another generous layer over the jute cord for reinforcements, even though this piece is very lightweight. Here's how it looks all finished and with an LED candle inside. Please do not use real candles in these sconces if you intend to light them. I'm absolutely thrilled with how these came out, so I made 2. DIY number 4 is a quick and easy Pinterest-inspired project. All I used for this project is a glass vase from Dollar Tree, some decorative bat cutouts from Five Below, and some gnarly tree branches from my yard. First, I arranged the tree branches inside the vase in a way that made it look like a full mini tree. I removed all the really low twigs off the branches so that they would look nice inside the vase. Then I used hot glue to attach the different size bats randomly on the branches. There was no rhyme or reason to where I placed a bat. I just placed it where I thought it looked best. I did end up putting several bats on the branches, but I didn't want it to look too cluttered, so I didn't end up using all of them. This is how the finished project turned out. I absolutely love this one, so quick and easy. For the last DIY, I used a 3-pack of wooden squares I picked up at Walmart for a couple of bucks and a couple of pages out of the Spellbound scrapbook. The 3 images I decided to use were the Book of Spells, Come In for a Spell, and Being Wicked is More Fun. I put an image onto each of the squares using a generous layer of Mod Podge and a foam brush. Once I had a nice layer of Mod Podge on the square, I centered the paper on the square and used a Mod Podge roller to smooth out all the air bubbles. To seal the paper, I added a very generous amount of Mod Podge over the top and used a foam brush to smooth it out to get rid of all the lumps and bumps so that it would dry smooth. I repeated these steps to put the images on the other 2 wood squares. Once the Mod Podge was completely dry, I took my sanding block and cleaned up the edges of each of the signs. Then, to add the finishing touch to this project, I used Folk Art brushed metal paint in the color brushed gold and painted the edges of all 3 signs. And that's it for this one. Super quick and easy, and they look amazing on the shelf or on a tiered tray. Here's the final reveal of all 5 of today's DIYs. I'm so thrilled with how all these DIYs turned out, and they're all super quick and easy to make. Which one's your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Mine is the bat candle sconce, hands down. Thanks for stopping by, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps out my channel. And if you haven't yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and stick around for a bit. Also, don't forget to check out the playlist below for more spooky inspiration. I'll see y'all next week for some Christmas DIYs.